For nearly 5 decades, Voyager 1 has been moving further and further away from everything we know, everything we have ever touched. It left Earth carrying with it the voice of humanity, our hopes, our songs, and a golden invitation to the stars. And for all these years, it has traveled through darkness and silence, whispering only data back to the planet. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing unexpected, until now. In May 2025, something changed. A signal was received. It wasn't noise. It wasn't static. It was a strange, distorted transmission coming from the edge of interstellar space. At first, it seemed like a glitch, a technical error in a machine that was shutting down. But when scientists looked closer, they noticed something they couldn't explain. A pattern, a loop, a rhythm that didn't belong to any system created on Earth. And that's when the fear began. Not because the spacecraft was malfunctioning, but because maybe it wasn't malfunctioning at all. Maybe Voyager 1 had finally been noticed, and maybe it was trying to tell us what it found. The anomaly began in Voyager's articulation and attitude control system, the core that allows it to orient its antenna toward Earth. It began sending corrupted data, readings that made no sense. According to the signal, the probe had turned in a direction that should have cut off communication. But here's the thing, it didn't. The signal never stopped. The data kept coming, strong and steady, as if Voyager was still aligned with Earth. But the readings said otherwise. The NASA team was baffled. They thought it was a firing error, a decaying circuit, or solar interference. But none of the diagnostics confirmed a physical failure. Then they discovered something much more disturbing. The system wasn't just malfunctioning. It was sending the data through a computer that hadn't been used in decades. A module that had been completely deactivated years ago was now suddenly active, as if it had always been part of the network. No one could explain how or why that part of Voyager had awakened, much less why it had taken control of the signal. And to make matters worse, this dead system was not acting randomly. It was choosing specific channels, isolating certain data, and wrapping it in layers of redundant encoding. It wasn't random, it was intentional. The probe was behaving like a mind trying to protect something, as if it knew it was being watched. When the engineers removed the corrupted layers of data, something began to emerge from the static. At first, it seemed like mere repetition, looping sequences with no scientific value. But a small team from the Deep Space Network applied an experimental compression technique designed to isolate harmonic signals. And that's when they heard it. A pulse. Every 7.2 seconds, a subtle but precise modulation, like an exhalation in the void. It didn't match any diagnostic or propulsion patterns on board. It wasn't coming from the sun or any known cosmic source. It was too perfect, too stable, as if someone, or something, was inserting itself into the transmission and mixing with the stream. They tried to override the data route, but Voyager rejected the command. For the first time in the mission's history, the probe disobeyed instructions from Earth. Not completely, but selectively. It accepted basic operational commands, but refused to change the route of that strange transmission, as if that signal were more important than anything else, as if, somehow, Voyager were protecting a message. But protecting it from whom? Desperate to understand what was happening, they called in a retired engineer, one of the original programmers who had worked on Voyager in the 1970s. He noticed something that no one else had seen. The structure of the signal had similarities to the old code used to calibrate the analog playback of the Golden Record, a sequence that was no longer used, buried in the ship's memory like fossilized DNA. Somehow, that forgotten code had been reactivated. Not completely, but in fragments, just enough to call out across space like a ghost remembering its name. This was no coincidence. It was as if Voyager had found something, a field, a frequency, a force, and in response had turned to the oldest part of itself to communicate. Almost poetic, isn't it? That a machine forged in the golden age of human hope, right on the edge of silence, would choose to speak in the only language we thought we had left behind. A language not for us, but for something ancient, something that listens, and perhaps something that responds. When researchers began mapping the signal over time, they found something totally unexpected. The intervals between each pulse weren't random. They corresponded to a Fibonacci sequence mapped out in time, a mathematical structure found throughout nature, from the spirals of galaxies to the branches of trees. But what was that doing embedded in a digital echo coming from the edge of space? The signal wasn't just repeating itself, it was evolving. The delay between pulses changed slightly, adjusting as if it were learning, reacting to our attempts to decode it. And each adjustment created a new harmonic resonance that, when visualized, formed symmetrical patterns, complex, recursive geometries that no natural system could produce without intention. This was no longer communication. This was something else. A system designed not only to be observed, but to observe back. A loop between sender and receiver, a kind of cognitive greeting encoded in time. And if that's true, then Voyager 1 is no longer a messenger. It's a mirror, a reflection of something on the other side. And now that mirror is shining. While NASA engineers struggled to decipher the emerging patterns in the corrupted data, a private group of astrophysicists decided to try something different. They fed the signal into a neural network, one that wasn't trained to interpret language, but to recognize intent through mathematical behavior. And what happened was indescribable. The AI didn't translate the data. It didn't explain it. Instead, it reproduced it, almost instinctively, mimicking the pulse and then improvising on it, generating new iterations in real time. It was as if the AI understood the signal not as communication, but as a form of music, a rhythm it could learn, play, and respond to. And as they let it continue, the responses became more complex, more structured, more conversational. Something out there, something on the other side of those 24 billion kilometers, seemed to be listening. It wasn't a glitch, it was a call. And maybe, just maybe, this was the answer. After weeks of analysis, an even stranger hypothesis took shape. What if Voyager 1 had not only traveled far in distance, but had crossed into another layer of space? The spacecraft had already moved beyond the heliosphere, into interstellar space. But now, scientists were contemplating the possibility that it had entered a boundary zone, a region where the rules of space and time could bend, slightly, but enough to alter our understanding of physics. This wasn't science fiction. Similar distortions had been recorded before: gravitational anomalies, time delays, fluctuations in cosmic background radiation that defied all logic. But never had a machine sent us anything so specific, so clearly structured, from within that distortion. It was as if Voyager was tapping into a different frequency of reality, not just receiving and transmitting, but resonating. And if that's true, this hidden transmission might not be a message in the traditional sense. It could be a vibration of truth seeping through the cracks of the universe. In one of the final attempts at decoding, an experimental linguist ran the signal through a program designed to detect human emotional rhythms, patterns of stress, pauses, and breathing in speech. The results were unsettling. The waveform of the Voyager signal closely resembled the rhythm of human heartbeats. It pulsed like something alive. It breathed like something conscious. It felt as if something was trying to mirror us, back at us. Suddenly, the transmission no longer felt alien. It felt intimate, personal, as if someone was holding up a mirror to us, not just of our technology, but of our minds. What if Voyager has become not a beacon, but a conduit? A tool used by something else, something ancient, something waiting in the darkness to show us that we are not alone. Not just in the galaxy, but in perception. And that kind of mirror doesn't just show who is out there, It shows who we really are. And then the inexplicable happened. During one of the nightly data monitoring sessions, the signal abruptly stopped mid-transmission. For exactly 7 minutes and 23 seconds, Voyager was silent. The team feared it was the end. But then, it came back. The same transmission, resumed as if nothing had happened. Same frequency, same pulse, same sequence, but with one subtle difference. At the end of the next cycle, the signal added a new harmonic, an ultra-low, almost imperceptible tone embedded in the waveform. A tone that, when plotted visually, formed the mathematical image of a Mobius strip, a symbol of infinite reflection, a path with no beginning and no end. And that's when many stopped wondering if the signal was a glitch or a message. They began to understand that it could be a presence, a silent observer who has been waiting for us to evolve, to learn, to know how to listen in the right way. And now that we have, perhaps it is no longer silent. We built Voyager 1 as a messenger, a silent ambassador for a lonely species. We gave it coordinates for Earth, music by Bach, a mother's kiss, a heartbeat. Not because we thought anyone would find it, but because, deep down, we hoped someone would. And now, almost half a century later, something has responded. But it didn't arrive in a spaceship. It didn't speak with words. It didn't descend with bright lights or grand statements. It arrived in the only way we weren't prepared for: a reflection, a mirror, hidden in static, wrapped in machine logic, encoded in silence. Because maybe what we feared most wasn't being alone. Maybe what we really feared was that something out there was already watching us, already knew us, and had been waiting since before we even launched Voyager into the void. And now that we finally hear its voice, faint, strange, and beautiful, we are left with a question that echoes in our souls. Was this the first transmission or the last warning?